All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring a massive question. Why exactly is the American dream fading? And to do that, we're looking at Frederick Wiseman's 1999 documentary masterpiece, Belfast, Maine. This isn't just a time capsule of a random town. It's actually a profound, micro-level look at some huge national shifts. Does the American dream still exist? Yeah, I know, it's a heavy question. But by using this small coastal town right on the edge of the 21st century as a microcosm, we can systematically unpack the answer. We usually talk about the American dream in these really broad, abstract terms, right? But Wiseman's camera grounds it in the gritty daily reality of everyday people. We're going to objectively trace this decay, and we're not doing it through politics, but through the totally unvarnished lens of a filmmaker who spent literally over 100 hours chronicling the working middle class. As film critic Steve Pulaski hit the nail on the head here, this doc is less of a travelogue and way more of a quiet epic charting an ideology in decline. So here's how we'll break it down. First, we'll look at a town in transition, then the changing face of work, the corporatization of care, some literature and the dream, and finally, structuring the truth. All right, part one, a town in transition, the ideal versus the real. Get this, when the film premiered back in 1999, a lot of locals actually walked right out of the theater. Why? Because they expected a sanitized Chamber of Commerce puff piece, not a harsh, unflinching look at rural poverty and daily struggle. They wanted the rugged coastlines and that cozy everybody-knows-your-name vibe. But Wiseman documented the absolute unvarnished reality. We're talking people living in abject poverty dealing with deep societal issues. The contrast between that idealized myth and the actual footage was just incredibly jarring for the community. Moving on to part two, the changing face of work, from local to corporate. Look at how rapidly things shifted. Post-World War II, Belfast was totally dominated by the poultry industry. But as those plants shuttered, the 1990s ushered in massive credit card call centers. This basically forced industrial workers into white-collar roles. And then, by the mid-2000s, they were absorbed in massive corporate mergers, completely distancing the workers from the actual fruits of their labor. This shift essentially marks the extinction of the Jeffersonian ethos. The death of small local businesses relying on pure hard work to survive. Places like Weaver's Bakery and Goose River Grocery used to be symbols of a socially cohesive America. If you worked hard, you succeeded. But they were replaced by vacant lots, multinational retail conglomerates, and environmental consulting firms. The unique personality of local commerce just vanished. Wiseman actually forces us to sit through 15 grueling minutes of older women doing incredibly monotonous, deafening labor on a potato processing line. It's intense. He juxtaposes this visceral, grating reality of the fading industrial workforce against the super bland corporate telephone banks that eventually took their place. It completely strips away any romanticism about the American working class, showing the sheer exhaustion of the dream right before it transitioned into those sterile corporate call centers. Which brings us to part three, the corporatization of care, the human toll. Critics of the corporatization of healthcare often point to chilling corporate language just like this. It frames human health and community care as a mere financial risk or liability. In one scene, Wiseman captures a hospital executive talking to administrators about the high rates of heart disease and obesity in Maine. But they aren't focusing purely on human healing, right? The language is entirely corporate. It really highlights how deeply that multinational business ethos had penetrated even local community healthcare. In one incredibly striking scene, we meet an elderly stroke victim and learn that over $100 is just his baseline monthly cost for medication. And that's not even counting his biweekly injections. We see this man who suffered a nervous breakdown and a stroke, living quietly in his trailer, while a social worker sits there just tallying up his needs. The staggering disparity here hits you like a ton of bricks when you compare those soaring medical costs to his meager $200 living expenses. It really showcases the true human toll of modern capitalism. This scene was so carefully constructed to demonstrate exactly what happens when the working class ages out of those grueling factory jobs, only to be left entirely at the mercy of a newly corporatized system. Let's look at part four, literature and the dream, metaphors of decline. To really grasp the philosophical weight of all this, there's a fascinating moment where a high school teacher gives a passionate lecture on Herman Melville's Moby Dick. He compares Captain Ahab to a gangster, a figure who rejects normal life for individual preeminence, leading to inevitable doom. This literary concept beautifully frames the argument that the relentless pursuit of the American dream is, in many ways, an exhausting and ultimately destructive scam.
It's a pursuit of endless growth that inevitably leaves normal, working people crushed in its wake.
And you can see that same desperation here, illustrating Willie Loman's wail of despair from Death of a Salesman. He's mourning the loss of a socially cohesive America that used to thrive in places like Belfast's family-owned bakeries. In the film, locals are actually rehearsing the play, and Loman's frantic realization that the business world has become cold and impersonal perfectly mirrors exactly what is happening in the streets of Belfast right outside those theater doors.
Finally, Part 5, Structuring the Truth, the Data of Filmmaking. So, think about this. Filming for 8 weeks and capturing 115 hours of everyday footage really proves that his non-interventionist method was actually meticulously constructed. He ruthlessly edited this down without a narrator. So the stark juxtaposition, like showing a trapped wolf right next to an elderly stroke victim, does absolutely all the heavy lifting. Allowing the meaning to emerge organically like that forces us to look deeply at a community left behind by the 21st century.
Wiseman himself actually admits that without this purposeful, dramatic structuring, his unvarnished truth about the fading American century would just be lost in 115 hours of boredom. By editing the film to open with a thriving, dawn-lit seaport and close on a cloudy graveyard, he makes a highly deliberate, almost fictional argument using entirely real, non-fiction footage. He's literally shaping the raw material of everyday life to highlight the slow disappearance of the American dream.
So I'll leave you with this thought. If an unvarnished camera captured your hometown for 115 hours, what truth about the American dream would it reveal? I challenge you to view your own community through this unflinching lens and see what might be fading away. Would we see the thriving ideal we like to imagine, or would the editing reveal the same subtle decay? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep looking closely at the world around you.